apologies for that slight omission, but I now take this singular honor to invite our guest of honor, who is none other than Professor Mukadasi Buyenza. Professor, you are welcome. Thank you.
I will just follow suit, my brother. Allow me to remove this. Hope the principal is not objecting to that. Our dear principal, my colleague, Professor Ikire, the deputy principal, Professor Chikoma, our distinguished panelists, Dean is here present, and heads of department, program coordinators, lead researchers and investigators, the early career academics here present, guests, my colleagues in the university administration that are with us online, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. I was whispering to the deputy principal here that we went to the same school, Namasagali College, but he learned better English than I did. So I was really scared whether I should really stand down or I should still go ahead and present my remarks. Nonetheless, I was invited by the principal, therefore I have a duty to perform. Colleagues of mine, tone down, relax. They have called it a conversation. Therefore, let's just converse and see what comes out of this conversation. It gives me, of course, pleasure that I've been invited to participate in this conversation with you all, a conversation which aims at advancing humanities and humanistic social sciences in our times. Allow me from the onset to thank the leadership under the able guidance of the principal and the deputy principal and all the other tiers of administration in CHUSS for really seeing it fit to hold and initiate this conversation series. This is the way to go. First and foremost, of course, I'll be thanking all of you for the efforts you've taken to advance scholarship at CHUSS and at Makerere in general. As the Director of Research and Graduate Training, I commend you all, most importantly the leadership, for initiating and sustaining this annual symposia that convene practitioners and scholars to deliberate on the contemporary issues of the time. Of course, without doubt, colleagues of mine, these activities help to enhance the academic vibrancy in the university, and this is our vision, all of us. We want to see an energized community, including faculty and graduate students, not only in the college but in the university, and also a faculty that will feature and showcase the relevancy as we celebrate this year-round centenary celebrations as a university. I applaud you all that you've continued to engage in these intellectual debates and knowledge production on behalf of the university. This is our mandate and the cardinal duty. I know for sure, as the Director of Research and Graduate Training, many colleagues and parents come to me inquiring what their children and peers do study at Makerere University because of the public acrimony against humanities and arts. When they come to my office and say, what do you think? My answer is a simple one. All of these are playing a complementary role. They all have a backward and forward linkage to each other. If the STEM science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and the basic science, biomedical sciences are really answering questions to do with what and how, then the humanities is answering why. Therefore, they are not, of course, they are not in any way at conflict with one another, and you will be really doing a disservice if you ever sit somewhere and engage in a debate as to whether one is better than the other. You remember when we were young, I remember in my, was it P4, we started debating. Mother is better than father, proposers and opponents, and we could tear each other the whole day. I don't know if I brought such a motion today, many of you would be willing to really engage in that discussion. Water is better than food. Does it make sense? Surely, we need both of them. That said, of course, this annual theme is in resonates well with the mandate of Makerere University as an academic institution, of course, through which we are expected to contribute to the generation of knowledge and ultimately transform society and improve livelihoods and our community in general. We are expected to find solutions, and these solutions are not based in either basic sciences nor humanities alone, but a combination of both. I therefore commend the college leadership and all colleagues here for demonstrating the zeal to prudently build this academic space as a platform for a thriving intellectual discourse. These kinds of activities and symposia indeed help us to serve as catalysts for improving academic excellence by exposing our faculty and students to a wealth of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that is out there, which in turn invigorates the pursuit of academic professionalism at all levels, and this is our vision as a university. I know for sure that this conversation is coming at an opportune time when we needed to pause and think deeply about many stories said about the different disciplines, the reality we live in today, the systems and structures that we operate in. It is also an opportunity for Makerere to measure its strength and contribute to solving societal problems in this century. And this can be done through humanities education, as my colleague put it. I know for sure what is at the heart of the matter. Are we really struggling to reclaim our rightful position? Are we seeking legitimacy as humanities scholars? What are we doing? What we are doing is that we want to really assert our position that liberal arts is that the art of humanity, and humanities and arts comprise its soul. If we know that, then we believe that this conference, this symposia, this conversation would not have come at a better time than now. I know for sure that all of us in this room, we have attempted to define humanities at one time. And we don't need really to engage in such fertile discussions and definitions. But what I know, it's about us as a people, it's about us as society. We need, of course, humanities and liberal arts to answer the number of planetary questions that really confront us. However, most importantly, and rightfully so, is the fact that the fears of the future of humanities are warranted. No doubt about that. These are warranted, okay? It is evident in the marked sharpest drop and decline in the number of majors in traditional humanities disciplines. People doing history, English language, philosophy, and name it, are really becoming fewer world over, even here at Makerere. And I think then we needed to pause and say, what is happening? One would say, of course, the numbers are more than the humanities. But because of the public discussion of relevance and contribution to societal development, many people are now thinking, even as way as primary, how do they get to the mainstream basic sciences? You've had this discussion. Why is that so? It's because there has been, of course, a general disbelief of the relevance of humanities, and our duty is really to continue asserting our position of our contribution, whereas we may not really do it numerically in metrics to show our relevancy, but I want to assure you that humanities are influencing all of the other disciplines. Tell me of any discipline that does not communicate. Mathematics does, engineering does, biomedical sciences does, and therefore it means they need the humanities at the center. The new humanities, now we are talking of gender, we are talking of sexuality, increasingly align themselves to social sciences. I've observed that, and its methodologies. Okay? Therefore, when we are looking for, we want to really to attribute relevancy, it is as if these are really outside. They are standing on a different ridge with the humanities, which shouldn't be the case. What we need to do is to emphasize the skills that humanities education is said to cultivate: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, problem solving, leadership, diversity, intercultural competency, and empathy. Once we do that, then you'll find a niche in all the other disciplines in the university. Most importantly, I think we need to think of the next generation of applied and practical humanities. Here I mean the translation humanities. You hear people talk about public policy history, talk about archival management, talk about museum studies, and all of these really provide practical skills to life, and therefore they rightfully belong to the humanities. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware that way back, I think it was 2017, when Andrew Mellon Foundation came to us with a request that they wish to establish collaboration with Makerere University, and they were committed to support teaching, learning, and research activities in arts and humanities and social sciences for the next 5 years. I remember I engaged in that discussion with my colleague then, Professor Edward Chirumira, and a few others, Professor Ikire, and many colleagues. Little did I know that that simple visit would really grow into what I see today. I've seen Andrew Mellon Foundation funding many other engagements and initiatives at Makerere. On record, I note that they have funded MISA with its decolonization project, the Early Career Scholars Research. They have also funded the capacity building for research and PhD training, historizing the humanities at Makerere since 1922 is one of them. They have doubly and generously funded the Center of Excellence in Research. Okay, they have also funded the recent project that was commissioned by the minister, Dr. Muyingo, archiving memory and methods. All of these initiatives show you the resilience and interest to really reimagine and resuscitate humanities globally. In the light of the above, I want to sincerely once again thank my colleagues in project administration, the project implementers, development partners, the stakeholders here present and joining us digitally, for all these best results that we've seen over the years. I want to thank Mellon Foundation for investing in research and for choosing Makerere as the collaborative partner in this part of the world. They could have chosen to go elsewhere, but they chose Makerere. We want to sincerely thank them. Government, of course, we commend the effort of government for the enabling environment, for the thriving research that we see at Makerere. But most importantly, I want to commend the organizers of this conversation, the symposium, for the time and efforts in the preparation and delivery. Thank you very much. And I take this opportunity to appreciate the speakers that will be sharing their vast knowledge with us later in the day. Distinguished guests, principal, deputy principal, deans, and my colleagues in administration here present, I once again want to thank you so much for finding this conversation worthy your time, and also to reiterate our commitment as a university administration to support you, provide that enabling environment for you to implement your vision and achieve your milestones as planned. We believe that together we have a lot of building lines between us. We can achieve a lot, and as a premier university, our vision is really to build the academia once again, the next generation of African academics. We've done a lot. We've supported the early career academics. We've nurtured research leaders at this university. It is now time to engage in the conversation. With these few many remarks, it is now my singular honor and privilege to declare the conversation open and to wish you fruitful deliberation in the 2 days ahead. Thank you very much as we build for the future.
Thank you so very much, our guest of honor. Thank you so very much indeed. We would like to recognize the presence of our principal.
In African culture, when a visitor comes, a big visitor like this one, the director of Directorate of Research and Graduate Training, he doesn't go without a vote of thanks. And I thought it is in order to thank Professor Buyinza Mukadasi for gracing our conversations, CHUSS Conversations 2021. This is not a mean achievement. This is a very difficult time of the year. I also had to first deal with a few things before I could join, and I know what is going on in administration of the university right now, so many things to close. So Professor Buyinza would like to thank you for supporting the college, always guiding us on matters to do with graduate training and research. And we want to assure you that we are up to the task. As of now, in these CHUSS conversations, what we are doing is actually harvesting. We are harvesting the research of early career. We are harvesting publications, as you've seen them, books that have been published, fortunately also by Makerere University Press, by members of this college. And for us, we didn't want to take that seated. We want to celebrate our colleagues that have put pen to paper. It's very important also for us and other young people to show that it is possible that you can actually write a book. I'm looking at Dr. Sauda Namyalo, I'm looking at Dr. Spire Sentongo, I'm looking at Professor Dipio, Dominica Online, and I'm saying, wow, CHUSS on the move. Thank you very much, Professor Buyinza.
Thank you so very much, our dear principal. Before you arrived here, your deputy did take very good care of us. We thank you both, and we thank you so very much once again, our guest of honor. I would like to welcome you once again, our guests who are here, and we have a lot of guests online. I must inform you we are streaming on YouTube, we are streaming on Twitter, and we are on Zoom. CHUSS indeed is on the move. The organizers, Zaidi and Lillian, of course we have a lot of organizers who are behind the scene. We officially end this session. You can take the guest of honor and the guests here away, we go into the next session. Thank you so very much. Maybe we can give another big round of applause to our guest of honor, our principal, our deputy principal. Thank you so much. Our next session chair. We give them another round of applause as they go down so that they can feel appreciated for the good job they've done for us. Our next session chair, Dr. Richard Asaba, you're very welcome here. And we have the early careers. I won't repeat what they are doing or what they've done. It's been ably articulated. As the early careers come to the podium, we would like to have a group photo, not a group photo of our guest of honor and principals. And the project coordinators of Andrew Mellon, and I can't reiterate enough our appreciation to our funders, the Andrew Mellon Foundation. As that is being done, Dr. Richard Asaba, Dr. Amon Ashaba Muine, please come to the podium. Dr. Florence Abila, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama Rukundo, and Dr. Ruth Insibirano. I hope all of you, ladies and gentlemen, you've got your program. What these distinguished scholars will be presenting to us is ably written there. Dr. Amon Ashaba Muine will be talking about feminism encounter with men and masculinities in Uganda. Dr. Florence Abila will be talking about autobiography as history, reflections from Maxine Ankra's autobiography, A Life Without Baggage. Dr. Evelyn Lutwama Rukundo will talk about popular music's contribution to young people's participation in the national politics of Uganda from 2000 to 2018. And Dr. Ruth Insibirano will talk about entrepreneurship and digital uptake. They'll basically be summarizing for us what they have been researching about in an easy way, in a conversational way, and you will, as you'll be told by the chair, you'll be welcome to engage them. Thank you so very much. I hand over to you, Dr. Richard Asaba. Before this, the places of convenience just around the corner. We know today we are having, I think, the typical wintry day for Uganda. So you may need to look for airtime or make some phone call in Ugandan English. So if you do need to go to the places of convenience, kindly pass by the information desk. They will guide you. Thank you.
I load it in Zoom? Yeah. The first one? Yeah. Okay, it's the one. This one here.
preparation, and if you don't have it, it's okay, we'll follow. After all, you're using about 5 to 10 minutes to present.
Good morning, everyone. I've already been introduced. I'm Dr. Richard Asaba from the School of Women and Gender Studies. I am honored to chair this session on the conversations around gender. My colleagues are all here. In the interest of time, we are going to use, I think, about not more than 10 minutes. If you can use less, that will be very good. And okay. I wish to invite Dr. Amon Ashaba Mwine, who is going to talk about the feminist encounter with men and masculinity in Uganda. Amon, you're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to CHUSS Conversation. The presentation has not been able to open. Nonetheless, I will proceed. I look at feminist activism and how this has encountered notions of men and masculinities. And as the previous speakers have indicated, I think feminism and the question of men and masculinities has historically been constituted in polarizing ways, ways that we have had about humanities and sciences and other polarities that people have pointed out already. So in this particular study, I wanted to look at how feminist activism in Uganda and has interfaced with and engaged with the question of men as they collectively challenge different forms of gender inequalities. So I picked out particular historical encounters in this journey of activism for gender equality and looked at the popular conversations that happened at different times, the kinds of construction and representation of experiences of women and men, and the kind of narratives that come out when you have conversations on feminism encountering those on men's experiences. 10 minutes are really a limit to something that you can present, but I want to quickly point to the early beginnings of feminist activism in Uganda around 1920s and 40s, where we had popular voluntary Christian-centered and community development women's clubs. And these were the collective force through which experiences of women's oppression were understood and articulated and transformation called for. These groups, which took the form of Mothers Union, Girl Guides associations, were predominantly headed by wives of colonial administrators, but also of wives of missionaries. And in some ways, that kind of foundation of collective mobilization was so much dominated by colonial discourses of the understanding of gender as a way of organizing social relations. I want to note that history around that time points to a foundation that nurtured these polarities, particularly in the way of understanding gender, but also on how we came to understand what inequality is, how inequality is constituted. We started to see the polarization of the public and private. We started to see the notion of gender largely, dominated by Western conceptions of male behavior and female behavior, in which, men's experiences were, perceived to be dominant in that hierarchy, and women's experiences on the other side. And therefore, experiences of women at that time constituted what was worth exploring and engaging with. And experiences of men, particularly African men, were not constituted as worth engaging with. And so there was this idea of associating men as closer to the state, to power, and to privilege, and as a standard upon which we needed to understand the rest of society. And this foundation, we see it continue in post-colonial understanding of gender, gender inequality, and articulation of gender transformation. So I'm going to quickly pick up on this symbol, which I found in 1980s as the popular way of understanding and challenging gender inequalities. And this was popular in the Ministry of Women in Development, where, as one of the respondents noted, that they used the balancing the scale as a way of understanding who was in need and therefore in need of attention, and who was privileged and therefore not worth looking at that time. So he noted that in the balancing scales manual, which was key to the ministry, one of the messages we had was that when the scale is tilted on one side, you have to put more weight on the other in order to balance it. And in some ways, this became the standard way of conceptualizing experiences of disadvantage, of oppression, and the template upon which the search for equality was conceptualized. I do note in the study that this kind of narrative at that time on balancing the scale conceptualized gender in binary ways, limiting knowledge about the other. So experiences of men, as you can see, and young boys were hardly perceived as worth engaging with. Even when, people in the activism at the time acknowledged that they actually encountered experiences of marginality amongst boys in fishing communities, in pastoral communities, but these did not statistically compare to the girls' and women's experiences, and therefore did not merit that attention at that time. And so these polarities continued to define what gender came to be, and unfortunately constituting it to look as if it was about women, for women, and addressing women's concerns. So you had campaigns in 1990s around women and the environment, violence against women coming through, and particularly addressing the constraints that women encountered at that time, and silences, massive silences around the possibilities of diverse experiences amongst men, and particularly possibilities of vulnerability. And so you had lots of programming around women, particularly challenging violence against women. You had lots of messages coming through that genre of communication cartoons. And these helped a lot at that time, as I note that they gave activists the opportunity to speak about the prohibited prohibited subject. Prohibited in the sense that domestic violence at the time was constituted as something in the domestic sphere that shouldn't be discussed in the public. But women activists were able to create a narrative in the public through this kind of humor, you know, portraying the constraints that they experienced. And I noted that despite this kind of engagement enabling women activists at the time to name violence as a public concern and an activism around violence against women reproduced men and women as polarized categories and reproduced binaries of men as perpetrators and women as victims. And we saw these polarities trickling into programming around HIV, where men were seen as the problem that needed to be tamed, around gender-based violence, but also around family planning. So in a way, then as we progressed, we started to see debates emerging on whether we can attain transformation without interrogating experiences of men. And so debates started to emerge on the role of men in the feminist movement, and this was particularly pronounced around Beijing conference in China, where we had a set of activists asking, where are the men in the movement? How can we talk about gender as if it concerns about women rather than a relational aspect? But at the same time, we had men who went to the conference being asked, why are you here? Why have you come? This is a space to engage with women's issues. And so these contentions have continued, unfortunately, until recently. But we have also seen an increasing turn to cause to involve men and to interrogate men's experiences as part of gender relations. When you look at UN agencies, if you look at local civil society organizations, when you look at the academia, there is a shift towards the need to understand experiences of men as part and parcel of gender relations. So as my minutes get finished, I want to highlight 3 key learnings that I have picked from the set of engagements in this course of 2 years. I have had an opportunity to publish a book chapter recently, Activism, a Case of Male Champions in Uganda. And this appears in the book which is out there on the table, Moving Back into the Future, which was edited by Professor DiPio, and a book chapter, and a set of blogs that I thought would create a conversation in the public about what masculinities are and how they can become part of, you know, theorizing experiences of men as gendered. So in these conversations, I have noted that there is a conversation emerging on the plurality of men's experiences, that men are not universal as the initial theorization had constituted them. So we have, in different platforms, reached at a conversation where we need to look at a range of masculinities and how these masculinities connect with each other, but also how they can be in tension with each other. We have reached at a level where we thought there is need to look at social context as very central to the construction and understanding of masculinities, much as it is in the understanding of femininities, and that patterns of gender relations can be different in different communities. We have also reached at a conversation where we saw the need to look at men as gendered subjects rather than as natural, standard way of understanding and relating with women. And the challenge I have noted in this is that the field seems to be dominated by certain concepts and theories that originate from the global north. And at times these concepts are not able to explain the local experiences of relations amongst women and relations amongst men. When you look at those who are theorizing hegemonic masculinity and the examples they use largely from Western societies, Australia, capitalist, wealthy communities. And these are often imposed and used to understand experiences of the local communities here. And I found that as one of the challenges that perhaps this scholarship could engage with. But also the idea of resistance to feminist activism or feminism broadly, that whatever achievements that seem to be registered in the transformation of gender relations creates tension, particularly from patriarchal societies. And this resistance has in some ways been equated to the work on men and masculinity. So when you are in feminist activism, when you talk about men, there's a feeling that you are reintroducing the question of men and therefore the question of domination, the question of privilege. But at the same time, there's need to understand that just like men and women are products of society, just like women are products of society, men too are products of this society. And so as I conclude, these conversations have demonstrated the need to move beyond the polarities that we commonly see in gender, in gender equality activism, particularly the polarity around looking at men as universal category, characterized by power and privilege. And I look at transcending polarities using the concept of border crossing as articulated by one of the African feminists, Obioma Naimeka, who argues that we need to look at how knowledge around feminism is being produced and move towards understanding experiences of men and women as gendered experiences. But in particular, she says that border crossing entails transcending disciplinary, conceptual, theoretical, and other forms of polarities, acknowledging to examine often unexamined experiences of men as gendered subjectivities, and moving beyond the dilemmas of colonial and imperial discourses that polarize men and women, but also that border crossing entails learning about the other. And when we cross these borders, humanities and sciences, men and women, perpetrator, victim, that when we cross these borders, we get the opportunity to learn about the other, but most importantly, to learn from the other. And she argues that this may not be an easy task because it requires, to learn from another requires to be humble enough to listen and to know. Thank you so much. I would like to stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amon Ashaba. Dr. Amon has taken us through the experiences, the feminist encounter with men and masculinities in Uganda. And in brief, he argues that we need to look at men's experiences as being gendered. He has also talked about the history of feminism in Uganda, balancing the scales, gender seen to be about women. So these should be issues that should take us forward in the conversations around feminism or femininities and masculinities. Now, I wish to welcome our second early career scholar for this session. That is Dr. Florence Abila, who is going to talk about autobiography as history, reflections from Maxine Ancra's autobiography, A Life Without Baggage. You're welcome, Dr. Abila.
You said that's yours, eh? Huh? Okay, just my email, eh? Yeah. You know what? You know what? Sorry for the delay, because I was, it's this one, okay. And then we shall put it in full PowerPoint, yeah. Yeah, scroll down, use that, and then that.
Good morning. I'd like to appreciate Mellon Foundation and the opportunity that it has given us early scholars to have conversations about works that are of interest to us. And I would like to recognize the presence of my mentor, Professor Carbonessa Consolata, who has been very instrumental, thank you, in helping me to understand some of these issues that I'm very passionate about. My interest generally is on autobiography, life story, and how life story becomes relevant beyond just looking at it as story. Autobiography has been studied mostly by literary scholars, and it has been a laid-back genre in the past where people think about studying the lives of people who are interesting or intellectuals, people who are of importance in society. And there are various forms, memoirs, biographies, and more recent forms that are coming up in forms of diaries and blogs and journals. And mostly people write just to share the ideas of what they have experienced. But I think that beyond just looking at subjective personal ideas, there could be more interesting things to look at in autobiography. And I asked the following questions. Can these subjective forms of subjective life stories provide historical knowledge that can be appreciated by the general public as history and not just story? What can we learn from personal subjective stories? And as stories of women are told in autobiographies, as women write their stories, what insights does it offer to women's lives during historical moments in which those stories are written? That's the title of my presentation, Autobiography as History. I argue that there is a relationship between autobiography and history because autobiography is not written outside the context of the society. It's written within a historical context. And therefore, Maxine Ancra's autobiography, which I've been analyzing on this project, this book, A Life Without Baggage, can be used to understand history because the claims, the experiences, and the stories that are represented in the text can be validated, analyzed, and critiqued in the context of historical moments and events outside the text. In particular, I focus on the personal experiences of Maxine Ancra to interrogate the role, the place, and the value of the discipline of social work and social administration within the academia
relating this to the broader debates about the place of social work and social administration in academia and in the society. As I interrogate this, I'm thinking about the context in which some of the disciplines in the humanities are being pushed in the background and undervalued. There are many debates about there is no need for social work and social administration. Let's just have political science. And we leave all these others as courses within political science and push others at the background. In this autobiography, she talks about the relevance of social work and social administration, plus the place of the humanities and gender scholarship indirectly. So the theoretical perspective that I use is new historicism, which in itself is problematic for a gender scholar. New historicism tends to ignore gender. So I'm using the theory, but also questioning the theory at the same time. It has been used by literary scholars to identify a piece of work within historical periods in which it is produced, the discourses, the ideologies, the cultural and political movements of that specific period of time. So I use this to trace and interrogate the relationship between the themes that are discussed and the historical moments and the events that are presented in the autobiography. Ankra almost phases her autobiography in 3 phases. Her life as an American before she comes to Uganda, and then when she comes to Uganda, the period between 1975 and 1977, and the period between 1977 and 1984. And the various activities she's engaged in, teaching, supervision and learning in Makerere. Then when she leaves Makerere, she goes to the women's world and is engaged with the women's organizations, starting several other organizations. So through this analysis, the study attempts to understand the connection between autobiographical accounts and the sources of history and discourses surrounding those specific themes. I have been identifying themes related to what I thought were interesting, and I've clustered them into 2 thematic areas in relation to history. The first one being intellectual history, and the second one being social history. And in the cluster of intellectual history, this is where she's talking about the institutions and ideologies, like the idea of social work and social administration. When it first started, the focus was on looking at communities and how communities, vulnerable communities, can be helped. And she's questioning, why should we focus on that in the current situation where there are various problems that are facing communities? Must social work change? And this goes back to, if we look at the history, even her doctoral research is looking at social work and social administration in Africa, in Zambia, Tanzania, and Kenya. And she looks at this and says, social work within the different countries is influenced by the political ideologies within those countries. Like in Tanzania at that time, it was influenced by Ujamaa. In Kenya, it was influenced by the politics of the time. And the relationship between social work and the emerging problems, the pandemic, the epidemics. There's a lot that she writes about HIV/AIDS and how the academicians have to be immersed in the issues that are coming up within those historical moments. So she gets involved in research on HIV/AIDS, and that persuades us to think outside the focus of social work, just looking at vulnerable communities, but looking at what are the key issues that are coming up in society. Thus, we see that there is supposed to be, we should be engaging in the debates of the relevance of the humanities in handling the social problems that are coming up within historical moments, and thus the significance of engaging with moments and with periods and the challenges that are there. And a part of the intellectual history also, we look at institutional politics and research in new areas and trends. The autobiography also helped me to engage with the ideas of the women's movement in Uganda, because she was engaged in part of the women's movement in Uganda. She was one of the founder members of the Department of Women and Gender Studies, which we have now changed the name to the School of Women and Gender Studies. So if we are talking of history, this is like living history that we need to refer back to. She talks about how the Department of Women and Gender Studies was started from this school of, from social sciences, from social work and social administration, and how it eventually became a department and now a school, and now we see gender mainstreaming being advocated for all over Makerere University, plus other institutions like Sewigo. And she also discusses the dilemma of the failure to unite forms of one solid black sisterhood across the globe. And that may not actually be intellectual history as such. That could be part of social history that I'm still pursuing and looking at, that she represents, she talks about in the later part of her autobiography. So the debate on relevance and how it relates to history and how it relates to what the ideologies that she espouses. In the autobiography, the last part of the autobiography has a series of articles that she has written and published. So it's not only a reflection of what she thinks, but also a recount of what she has written that we can find in the autobiography. So the representation of history through literature is very relevant, and if we look at the key emerging issues, the way she presents her chapters, we pick a mixture of literature being used to advance certain themes. I'll just pick one example. The use of allegories. When she returns to Makerere University, she first came to Makerere, taught in Makerere, then left, and then came back, and she calls that the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage as an allegory is representing the period between 1977 and 1984, and the many things that took place within that Middle Passage was that there was institutional change, there was a lot of political and historical moments where the Idi Amin era, most of the scholars were running out of the country. In fact, she does run out of the country, and she talks about Bishop Janani Luum, the involvement of the church in politics, and how they had to escape for their safety. So we see elements of history being represented in this text. And from a woman's perspective, we're understanding how this impacted on her as an individual, but also we understand this relating to the other texts that she refers to, and that I'm also reading, plus the interviews that there's some key individuals that she mentions in the text that I've also been interviewing to talk about this linkage between history and literature. So the link between Ankra's subjective experience with institutional growth at Makerere is evident. She has letters as evidence of historical conversations between management and staff at Makerere University that she engaged with by the time when she was being made to leave Makerere. Then the second aspect that will inform the second journal article that I will be writing is to do with social history. She writes about her background, and she brings this into conversation this dilemma that exists between feminist scholarship, between race and class, and the representation of scholarship for Africa. I'll give you an example. When Ama Ata Aido wrote about Eulalia, the dilemma of a ghost, the black African American coming to the continent and feeling that she has come back home, and the continent just looking at her as the other. That was in fiction. Now, in reality, she presents this story, and she talks about the dilemma of not fitting, which I'm trying to interrogate those subjective experiences, whether to place them within racism, sexism, and the tribalism that she interrogates and talks about in her autobiography. These are conversations that are difficult to handle. In most cases, we shy away from talking about differences. We always want to talk about a uniformed gender movement, but there are differences within those movements which she brings out. Issues of classism, issues of sexism. As a scholar at the Social Work and Social Administration Department, how she feels that she's looked at first as a woman, as an outsider, as an American, and does not quite belong. So the social history of racism and exclusion comes in here, and those are some of the themes that I've been trying to explore and write about. In conclusion, I would say that the subjective manner in which these stories are told do not make them any less relevant. They are not personalized because we can relate them to other texts outside what she talks about. We can relate them to historical moments, and she provides accounts of events that were happening within those moments in time to help us to analyze this and put them in context. So Ankra's autobiography indeed does provide avenues for interrogating how institutions can impact positively on the life of individuals and how individual women struggle to negotiate for spaces within institutions. I've been able to present 3 times at the CHUSS conferences as a result of getting this award. I have 2 upcoming journal articles that I'm going to write, and I look forward to presenting one of them for the publication for Makerere at 100. I've submitted an abstract to the committee, and I got an acknowledgement. I'm still waiting to see if it's going to be accepted, and that will be one of the publications. Then the second one is likely to go outside Makerere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Florence Abila. We have seen from our presentation that the works of Maxine Ankra are very critical in terms of understanding the role of institutions, especially Makerere, including Makerere, and the thematics of the intellectual and the social, how these stories are very critical in integrating or interrogating how institutions can impact on the lives of individuals. Now, I would wish to welcome Dr. Evelyn Lutwama. In the interest of time, I'll give Dr. Evelyn 5 minutes. Yes, because I think yeah. So I was saying 5 minutes because we need time to engage the audience. I'm sure there are people who have questions for the previous presenters. So please, Evelyn, you're welcome.
I'm going to speak from here. No, it's okay. They've given me only 5 minutes anyway. All protocol observed. Good morning, everyone. My name again is Evelyn Lutwama Rukundo. Like the previous speaker, my mentor is Associate Professor Consolata Kabonesa. Okay, stop the clapping. I have only 5 minutes. My title, I'm sorry I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but anyway, 5 minutes wouldn't give me much. My title is Popular Music's Contribution to Young People's Participation in the National Politics of Uganda. The time span is 2000 to 2020. In brief, I want to start by noticing that this field of popular music squarely falls in the concern that humanities and social sciences are not given as much attention and respect as they should be within the academia. Because starting off, the definition of popular culture encountered many struggles. Within the West, popular culture was seen to belong to the masses and therefore was not credible enough to be an academic area of study. So there was a bit of struggle to have even the issue of popular music being recognized as an academic arm. Fast forward, coming to the African continent, popular music has also again struggled because often African scholars have looked at popular music as some kind of imitation of the West. And therefore it hasn't been seen as totally authentic as the other kinds of entertainment within the African continent. And therefore it's been a struggle to establish its foot, but it is there as an academic field. So I would like to quickly talk about the general objectives of this study, and one of them was to investigate the coverage of popular political music and consumption within the country. Apart from that, I also wanted to look at the political content of the most popular music within the country. I also wanted to see the effects of this music on young people's interest and participation in politics. And on another level, I wanted to see how gendered the processes are. I visited 4 cities. I visited Mbarara, Mbale, Kampala, and Gulu cities with the interest of interviewing young people, both male and female, about their interest and consumption of political music. It turned out that 2 cities were heavily engaged in the production of popular political music. That was Gulu and Kampala. So within the time period of September and October 2020, that's before the election, I was able to interview respondents from the 4 cities, which totaled to 1,533 respondents. That was on a quantitative level. But this particular presentation is interested in the 2 cities, Gulu and Kampala, where 384 respondents from Kampala and 383 respondents from Gulu participated in the process. So some brief findings, and these are basically based on a question, a very simple question: which songs make you feel interested in politics? What I discovered in Gulu was that the most preferred songs, the first one was Freedom by Bobby Wine. Another one was Age Limit by Bosmi Kotim. There was a very big interest in Bosmi Kotim because he also had Politics of Revenge as favored and Peace Return as favored. But also we had Tubonga Nawe and Tuliambala Ngule as among those that were preferred within the Gulu city. Kampala, on the other hand, the most prominent at that time, that is September to October 2020, was Tuliambala Ngule, then Freedom, Tubonge Nawe, Abantu Bakowu by Matthias Walkaga, Africa by Ronald Mainja, Zukuka Uganda, Bobby Wine and Nubian Lee, Situka. So there was a very strong presence of 2 particular artists within the 2 cities. This is not to deny the fact that there are some female musicians that were also actively involved in the production of popular political music. And one within Kampala who was very outstanding was Matilda Powers. She sang songs like Chiriba Chitianga, Bobby Afuse President, Jaja Weraba, something like that. But you also had artists like Sarah Nahumita and Shakira Banks, who sang Ngenzene Bobby. We also have Lillian Navasa, who was singing Yebare Muzei. But also in Gulu, we had artists like Liama, Rosalind Joyce Otim, and Grace Atim. Generally speaking, though, the field was heavily male-dominated. And as a result, I thought of this title. I am a man, I am young, and I can sing. Political activism in the popular music within Buganda and Acholi. I am a man is that emphasis that, well, the subject that we are going to deal with is quite masculine. Politics per se is quite masculine, and a lot of research has gone into this, looking into, first of all, the presence of the women within politics, but then also the challenges that those women face as they endeavor to be part of the political process. So it is generally a struggle for the women within the political scene. But the other aspect of this title is I am young, and it's emphasizing age. The genres that I look at mainly are of raga or reggae. Bobby Wine goes more closely to raga, and then Boss Miko Team goes closely to reggae. Both genres require a lot of energy, you know, a lot of jumping and moving around, and you know, the emphasis of age and youthfulness. But it is the same quality that makes them very likable to the young population. This is not to say that the older people never enjoyed the music, they did, but by and large it seemed to be attractive, very attractive to the young people, and many felt that they identified closely with the musicians. So very briefly, I hope the 5 minutes are still here. They are done. Okay, I'll just mention that two songs I identified, Freedom by Bobby Wine and Age Limit by Boss Miko Team, were targeting the removal of Clause B of 102, Article 102 of the Constitution, which said that a person is not qualified for election as president unless that person is not less than 35 years and not more than 75 years. Both songs were targeting this, and there was a struggle from the songs to try and stop the scrapping of Part B of that clause. I just want to very quickly give you some content. Freedom starts off by saying, this is a message to the government, expressing exactly what is on the people's minds. Both age limit, on the other hand, goes like, age limit is a good thing. Why remove it? Age limit is democracy. We should not remove it. If firstborns would not stop breastfeeding, we would not have lastborns. So there was a strong emphasis of please stop what you are doing on the political scene. Freedom continues to say, bagamba eyalinga democracy mwamuvuluga, which can be translated as, they say that you have fumbled with democracy. Kati yafuuka na hypocrisy. Now it has turned into hypocrisy. Age limit, on the other hand, goes ahead to say, you don't want to go. Why? When people are crying, you don't want to go. Why? So both songs seem to be very, very daring, and you know, there's a sense of abandonment that the singers have around them, a feeling which was very difficult to find around the female musicians, because the female musicians were in spaces where society looked at them as future mothers, and therefore just by being part of music production was seen as not very good for young women. Young women in both societies need to be good wives, need to have a good public image, and therefore when you went into music production, you were likely to be promiscuous, in quotes. The male musicians were seen differently. They were in a space where they could speak, because publicly men are allowed to speak. So they were in a space where they could speak, and they spoke freely, only that they were in the constraints of the political space. And so those kinds of settings made it very difficult for women to freely participate within the process. There's a symbolic connotation that came with these kind of songs, and I'm trying to wind up. This symbolic connotation was, the young people called it the struggle. The older people called it hooliganism. So there were two constructs in the process because of the presence of this music. And you know, the construct of being a hooligan also comes with the issue of challenging power. It seemed much easier for the male musicians to challenge a dominant power compared to the female musicians. Unfortunately, one of the prominent musicians in Kampala, the one I just mentioned, met her death by accident. The lady who sang Chiriba Chitia, Matilda Powers, in her early 20s, had an accident, and therefore she died. And so that marked the end of her musical career. Liama, on the other hand, who was also very prominent in Gulu, tried to contest on a political ticket, but her presence also met a lot of resistance because of the constructions that I've earlier talked about. Thank you. Let me stop there. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama Rukundo. I think we have all seen that popular music has a role to play in the politics of Uganda. I had expected her to talk about Kasukali Keko by Bobby Wine, but unfortunately she has not talked about that song. Maybe it was skipped. I think now let's move on to our next scholar, that is Dr. Ruth Nsibirano, who is going to talk about entrepreneurship and the digital divide. Please reserve your questions after Ruth's presentation.
Is it one of these?
No, it's not. There was a folder. Hers is on entrepreneurship. Is it this one?
Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, that one. 5 minutes.
I'll do my best. Okay. Good morning, members. I'm also excited to be here today, and I will share with you, as they project my presentation, that I had a dream that Richard was going to reduce my time to 2 minutes. So I'm going to try. I prayed about it, and I'm sure he's going to have a second thought. I'll not go into the details of what I have prepared for you, but I want to recognize my mentor, Professor Kabonesa, who has stood by me all this while. And what I have become, she is responsible. I also want to appreciate Andrew Mellon. There are so many things I didn't know. When I was writing my proposal, they told us to write it humanistically. Now that one was difficult. But I said I will dare. Professor Kawanesa told me never to say no, you can do it. So I said I will write. And when I wrote the committee, I thank you for finding sense in what I proposed. This morning I want to share with you what I set out to do. I wanted to examine the influence of gender constructions on us and on ICT, understanding those tools. I also wanted to understand those meanings that we construct, those values that we hold, those perceptions that we hold. What do they translate into when we come to consider technology and its uptake? I was very convinced from the interactions and also from the readings that I had been doing that small, medium, micro, name it, entrepreneurship is a field that is coming up, and it is taking more women. So I set out to go and understand what women in 3 districts were doing and how they were using ICT and what it was doing for them. So I went to Ginger, of course that's where I come from. The Bible says we'll always start with our own. Then I went to Mbarara. I wanted to drink some milk because some people sometimes think I'm from there. I stayed in Kampala as well and looked at the women in the marketplaces. In Ginger, there is a popular market that sells vegetables and fruits. The place is Ambakot, just after you have crossed the bridge. In Mbarara, the central market. In Kampala, Lubaga, and Nakulabye. I have a conviction that ICTs have gained popularity and that they are recognized for how they transform the way we do our things and for contributing towards efficiency and effectiveness. So if that happens when people use ICTs, possibly even the women can be empowered. They can access information. In entrepreneurship, information is very crucial. And therefore, if the women who have small businesses, the businesses that we see springing up like mushrooms and then falling and dying, indeed like the mushrooms die, have a very short life, they could actually have lasting, grounded enterprises if they integrated the use of ICTs, and their businesses could be better. But then, they are, as women entrepreneurs, limited. They have challenges of time, challenges of raising capital, startup capital. What they generate as profits is consumed back in the household. So how do they understand entrepreneurship? Why do they now end up cracking the egg and eating it and preventing themselves from seeing a grown-up chicken? So I wanted to understand what is the meaning of entrepreneurship. And I was delighted to know that entrepreneurship is nothing other than innovativeness. All entrepreneurs must have that particular skill of identifying an opportunity and making the best of it. They attach a very strong value to the opportunity that they have found, and they have to guard it very jealously. All entrepreneurs are selfish with information. That is why many of you who might have had an occasion to go to Kampala, the popular Chikubo, when you want an item, an entrepreneur will never be kind enough to direct you to where it is. They will always tell you, it's Chirimo store, let me go and pick it. And then they go to the wholesaler, pick it at a lesser value, come and sell it to you in the same location where you are standing. They are guarding their information, they are guarding their enterprise, they are guarding their innovation. They are guarding the opportunity they have received, that you want this and you don't know where it is. And in doing that, that is the profit they are making, and that is how they are growing. But I also realize that women are not that selfish. When they are looking at entrepreneurship, women are inward looking. They want to exploit the opportunity, yes, but so much so that it can then be able to make them make ends meet. They want to find more money to be able to put food on their table, to find money for school fees for their children, rent, many things, but it's about them. It's never about out-competing others. And possibly that is where the problems come for the women entrepreneurs. That's why they end up spending what should have been plowed back to the enterprise into solving the issues that they have. Another motivation, value they have attached to entrepreneurship as women is to gain independence, is to gain access to the things that they have never had, like property. One of the women that I talked to said, I was tired of working for others, and many times women have worked for others. Let's bring this young girl. She's going to be trusted with our money. She will not cheat us. But in the process of being trusted workers, they are not repaid faithfully
what they really deserve. So over time they get tired. So when they run out of the confinement of working for others and join entrepreneurship, because by this time they have gained the skill and the knowledge, it is to make themselves better and to earn something for them that will also take them forward. Then I looked at ICT and entrepreneurship. Do women attach value to the ICTs? What do these ICTs mean to them? Are there gender constructions that affect the women? And I found that there is no direct limiting factor for women not to own or access ICTs that are very different from what men go through. However, the gender realities come in to affect the kind of technologies that the women access. For example, I realized that the most popular ICT among women entrepreneurs was the phone. But even with the phone, there is a gender construct of not spending a lot unnecessarily. And so they prefer the smaller cabinet type of phone, not the smartphones that you and me would have loved to have. And there is also another value that is attached to a cabinet. As the women are working on their market stalls, many of them have children. And if they are serving the customers, the child might also demand for their attention. So a cabinet is easier to toss to the child to play with. And so they do not put a lot of risk to the phone. After all, it is not so much costly. So they will not risk their smartphones and give it to the child. And so then the child will stand in their way as they are transacting business. So they usually go for the cheap phones. Even when the child drops them, they will not get spoiled. One lady said, I cannot take a lot of money and put it in a mere phone. I prefer the small phones. Nebwekagwa wansi, opanga bupanzi. They do not get spoiled like the big smartphones. ICTs in the type of computers are very limited in usage among the women. Interestingly, the women, I don't want to generalize them. Some of the women were distanced from computers because of their education level, because of their income, and because of the nature of businesses that they were doing. Women that are in produce, women that are selling second-hand clothes, they did not have reason to use computers. But there are a set of women entrepreneurs in what I have called the high-end businesses, like the wholesalers, like those in hotels, the service industry. Those were using computers, and they were able to be in locations that helped them overcome some of the challenges associated with using computers, like the skill, like the language, because most of the content on the computers is in English. There was also another underlying advantage or disadvantage to the women. There is that limitation of how much association or liberty to play around with technology that is more biased towards the men and disadvantages the female. This carries on even when they are grown. They do not want phones or systems on the computer that they do not easily understand. But that also was different from a younger generation of women entrepreneurs, the 20 to 30 aged women, and those who had stayed in their business for more than 5 years. Those were easy at relating with technology, better technology like smartphones. But I also realized that there was another limitation, data. So this constrained them to an extent that they only used possibly the chat, like WhatsApp, only when they had data. But the older women, mainly in the markets, were not in a position to use smartphones. Therefore, the exceptions were seen in women entrepreneurs using technology in terms of their businesses in terms of education. Those who had education, at least beyond primary, were able to uptake technology. Those that were operating businesses in urban areas were better placed to use technology than those in the rural areas. That's why you find that in Mbarara and Kampala, there was a higher uptake of ICT among entrepreneurs. That is where I was able to find women very sophisticated, using even CCTV cameras to monitor their business premises, to monitor transactions, to monitor who has come in and what they have been doing. One of them also confided in me and said that actually there is a huge benefit if women can embrace technology, because it pays off. You get more access to customers that you would not have had. But the advantage she had is that she was herself educated. She had a bigger capital base, and she was into clothes. She identified her customers, generated a network list with them, and these were university graduates. So whenever she brought in new merchandise, she would reach out to them, take all the pictures of the dresses that she has brought, the bags, the shoes, and send them out. And so it was paying. The other very successful entrepreneur I found was a smoked fish wholesaler in Mbarara. And this one was very proud and confirmed that she now can market her produce far and wide because of uptaking technology. So the lived realities of women are situated. Things like education make a difference, capital, duration in the working environment, even the location. Those that are near towns have better opportunities, and they also have, through their interactions, been able to cultivate a positive attitude. I found women that no longer hold cash, but they do their transactions using mobile money. When you send your clients the pictures, they send you the money, and then you find another alternative for you to be able to take their merchandise to them. So strategies that I found very wanting are that there is a need for different motivators to be in place, because we have talked about skills, but skills alone are not going to be enough to encourage uptake of ICTs in entrepreneurship. We need to motivate the business women in the lower end jobs to be able to learn that they can network, they should build networks themselves and maintain contacts so that they can look at different avenues of accessing their customers. The lived reality of only waiting for those customers that will come to their stalls is not going to be sustainable. And then we also need to train them. The microfinance have taken this up, and they train the people. They demonstrate on different media platforms how people can grow their businesses when they take credit. And therefore, I want to stop here and encourage all of us to embrace ICT and to support women to come up with positive attitudes that appreciate the use of ICT. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth Nsibirano. I think we all appreciate that education, capital, working environment, location, influence the use of ICTs by entrepreneurs, both men and women. I am worried about time. Dr. Magara, do we have time for questions? Because we are already into the break. Should I allow 5 minutes? Yeah. So 5 minutes for questions. Just as a reminder, we've had 4 presenters this morning. Dr. Amon Mwine on the feminist encounter with women, rather with men, and masculinities in Uganda. Dr. Abila on the autobiography, reflections from Marx in Ankara. Dr. Lutwama talked about popular music and its contribution to young people's participation in the national politics of Uganda. And lastly, Dr. Ruth Nsibirano on entrepreneurship and the digital divide. Probably one question per presenter, I don't know. Let's start with
thank you very much.
Yes.
All these studies are really interesting. We actually needed more time to ask the questions and have conversations about them. But I don't know how we are going to manage that. My question is to Dr. Amon Muine and also to Evelyn Lutwama Rukundo. Any one of them can answer this. The true African masculinity embraces actually responsibility, love, and honor. And that is the reason why the emphasis is on protection and provision for the family, and also integrity. And actually, the true African masculinity is not about the strength, but it is about strength of a character, not the physical strength, but the strength of character. So my question is, how do these notions and the values of masculinity resonate with your studies? And to Dr. Ruth, one time I was going to Gaba National Major Seminary, and I saw mushroom pushed up tarmac. And I actually saw strength in weakness, which is uncommon for a mushroom to do that. But here we are talking about women entrepreneurs. And there is deliberate silence about the men in the entire process. Are men of no consequence in your study of women entrepreneurs and ICT?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, they have been really very wonderful presentations, and you know, I was noting down a number of issues and questions, which I thought I would ask everyone, but I think that will be taking the whole space. So I will just limit myself to one presenter, and that will be Amon Muine. I just thought that this was very beautiful. You took us through a number of, you know, developments around, you know, engagements of men in feminist studies. I was just wondering, much of that did not have you in it. What was your transformational moment in engaging with, I definitely think that, you know, you didn't come to feminism direct. You came from other disciplinary backgrounds. And, you know, that would help us in understanding this question of allyship, you know, and the backlash politics that comes with you as a man being identified with what sometimes people think are female issues. And also just reflect a little bit more for us on, you know, the generations of scholars in feminism, especially in Makerere University. I like to think that the set of men in gender studies today and the kind of things they have to navigate compared to, you know, those that were in gender studies a decade or more ago. I'm looking at questions, people like Henry Manyire and so on. You know, they represent different takes on how far transformation in feminist scholarship has gone. I would like to just hear you more a bit in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, presenters. I would like to start with the last one, where Ruth is saying that women are distancing themselves from ICT. And the question is, do you think there is a remote control behind the scenes stopping them from uptaking, like blaming the victim, like the insinuations of girls with smartphones and other norms and practices? And to Amon, you talked about the men who are portrayed as some gatekeepers of knowledge, and some of these as natural, but I see an assumption of these men who are standing outside the gate, but they are being seen as gatekeepers. What do you find as the challenge of keeping men assumed in these positions of power? And to Florence, I would just like to say, yes, when you see these issues coming out of the autobiography, I would like to ask you as a scholar, feminist scholar, is there a way you can highlight the key issues relating to Ankara's stories to bring out the story of feminism in her story, so that as scholars of the feminist scholars can learn more from her stories? And lastly, to Evelyn, yes, I was still enjoying when you stopped, but I wanted to find out how music like pictures speak volumes and how these can help symbolically bring out the perpetuation of gender inequality in music, in politics and music, something of the sort. But thank you very much for these engaging presentations.
Hello, I hope it's switched on now. I'd like to ask very short question, so it won't take long, to Dr. Ashaba. Why did you pick on the symbol of unequal scales, of the symbol of the 1980s? Why is it significant? It wasn't clear to me, and yet I thought it was very central to what you were discussing. To Dr. Rukundo, is the claim that African scholars have looked at popular music as from the West totally correct? Because we are doing scholarly presentations, it may be good for you to actually evaluate and reflect on these things. And it wasn't very clear to me what time the interviews were carried out and why you chose that particular time. And I know that your focus was not literary, nor on musicology, but I thought you ought to engage more fully with the texts and to show how then the interaction with the audience becomes important. To Ruth, can you please interrogate the concept or the whole notion of the use of capability and within the business women circles more carefully? For example, how do these women network? How do they position themselves? How do they utilize their resources? And for Dr. Abila, you talked on autobiography and history. So how do you engage in this particular presentation with the issues of self, identity, and history? Thank you.
Thank you so much, the presenters, for your inspiring presentations. My question goes to...
Please let us know your name briefly before you give us your comment. It's helpful.
My name is Justus Twesije. I'm from Social Work and Social Administration.
Yes, Justus.
My question goes to Ruth Severano, talking about entrepreneurship and digital uptake. Now, listening to Ruth, you seem to make comparisons in your findings. You talk about women in different, regions or different districts. You talk about, women with different categories. For example, those who are younger, from those who are older. In a way, your presentation seems to make real comparisons that there are differences between these different groups. Somebody listening to you, maybe from a statistical background, we imagine that you actually tested relationships between the different variables. For example, age with digital uptake. But the findings which you present, I don't see any statistical results. One wonders how, for example, you make a claim that there may be higher uptake among younger people than the older ones. Because I don't see how you tested these relationships. Did you do, for example, did you do any specific tests, such as, chi-square tests, chi-square correlations, test these relationships, also to show the strength of these relationships? We don't see those results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Patrick Mangeni, and my point goes to Ruth. It's clear that your focus was on women, but when I listened through, there are also kind of attributions being made to men, and that seemed to fit within the mold of what Dr. Gaba discussed, and that's the kind of presentation of men or attention to men with a certain silence that will seem to focus gender as being mainly on women, but also trying to project the men as the antithesis on the other side. I want just to look particularly at this aspect of underpaying women as a motivation for them to move into a business. Did you try to look at the men and see what also motivates them to move into business? The implication here is that men, when men underpay women, then women are motivated to move into business. Are there some men who also move into business because of such the situation? And also, when you seem to say that when women get into business, it's not really about themselves. It's not about competition. Perhaps not so much about profit, but it's about putting food on the table. What takes men into business? The men that go into business go because they care about their families. What takes us men into business? I'm just asking. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Dr. Ajibola Shepun. Let me quickly commend the presentations of the different scholars. It's been brilliant and it's been very engaging. I have just a question for the first presenter and another question for the second presenter. And the first question borders on the involvement of male folks in gender studies. The presenter pointed out the fact that there are areas of interests that should be of concern in this endeavor. But I didn't hear him very clearly on these areas of interest. So I would like him to please throw more light on that. Then the question I would like to ask next is from the second speaker, that's Dr. Abila. She mentioned the fact that the black returnees to Africa felt isolated. And I was wondering whether that observation was made by the author of the autobiography or it was a personal observation. I want some clarification. Thank you.
Is that all for the questions?
I'm here.
Okay, one more, please, in the interest of time. Dr. Dr. Nisima.
This is Anna Nisima from the School of Women and Gender Studies. Mine is very short. It's basically a conceptual concern that I think comes from Amon's presentation, but which should be a concern to all gender scholars. I mean, it's quite interesting and very nice to hear Dr. Mwine presenting about the other side of men that has quite often been neglected. But what I heard is that men are gendered. So if men are gendered and women are gendered, then we probably as gender scholars need to ask ourselves whether we need to redefine what gender means. What does gender actually mean? I think this is a great something that I felt we need to engage with and critically look at it and see whether there is need to redefine what actually gender means and what feminism means. And then for Abila, I think I really like the whatever, I may not spell the thing, but I would quickly want to hear from you. What is it that is in for us? What are we picking? I think that's what Peace probably alluded to. If you could clearly, maybe in 1 minute or two, clearly bring out what is it that we pick from these autobiographies. Thank you.
I thought I had closed the questions. You have allowed him one more? Okay, very last one.
Oh, thank you very much. And since it is the last one, I will keep it short. To Dr. Amon, do you think the weighing scale is the best way of measuring gender equality? And according to a study, how far has the weighing scale balanced? Then to Dr. Evelyn, could you, to what extent do you distance the musician presidential candidate from influencing the young people's participation in the national politics to that effect? Thank you very much. I'm Nicholas, a student of history.
Okay, I hope that is all for the questions. In the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask our scholars to respond to the questions. They're really burning questions because you can't respond to all. I think Dr. Mwine had more questions. I will give him 2 minutes. Then I'll give Dr. Bila and Dr. Lutuama and Dr. Nsibilano 1 minute each because we need to go into the break. Thank you very much. Dr. Amon?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, participants in this conversation. I want to take this opportunity also to introduce my academic mentor, Professor Josephine Ashchile. So some of these questions will also be fragged into that direction. Yeah, as we heard about the true African masculinities. And I want to say that even that itself might be contested, the true, which might allude to a certain form of stability. But what this study demonstrates is that when feminism or feminist activism encounters masculinity, at least in the context of Ugandan conversations, you tend to meet silences which are generated by the scale, the tendency to focus on one and not the other. And these silences have not enabled elaborate and detailed articulation of experiences of men as part of gender relations. And where then notions of masculinities resonate with this study is within the future directions that I suggest. Directions which point to the need to look at masculinities, just like we have looked at femininities, as unstable, fluid identities that are constituted within particular social context, to the level that you can be able to talk of masculinities nurtured and harnessed in an African context, given a particular culture that you want to follow. So that's where the resonance is, that we've reached at the level of the conversation where there's a certain consensus that we need to look at masculinities not as stable, universal character of maleness, but rather as fluid social identities that vary and shift. And therefore, that social context enables us to turn back to history, for instance, and look at how did African men experience colonialism, and was it justifiable for colonialists to dismiss African men as not men enough? That is one of the studies I'm proposing to do beyond this. How do we ground scholarship and activism on masculinities to the level of understanding the fluidity of this concept? And the transformational moment for me was to point out these critical moments in which you could read deliberate or reluctance of feminism to know masculinities and men's experiences, even when they are as social and fluid. And so that transformational moment comes in the sense that as you look at scholarship of feminism in Makerere, we've reached a level where now we can talk of masculinity studies in the School of Women and Gender Studies. That we have reached a level where you can generate all these questions from an audience that wants to understand how we can universalize experiences of men, particularly on Western notions of what a man is. And I think for me, it points to the idea that men can change, they're not universal, and once we can understand that and engage into exploring these changes, then we will see the diversities. We will see how these men can change even for transforming gender relations. So the scale was not my making, the scale was reflecting a dominant discourse that framed the understanding of gender at that time in 1980s. And in its binary way, it limits the knowledge of the other, because as you have seen, the ministry and indeed the activism that emerged from that was saying we need to focus on women and girls, because that is where we see fewer numbers of girls going to school. That is where we see inequality. And as a result, this scale compromised how much we could know from the other side. You know where you put this stone, which works as a standard, and then you start working on this other to balance. And you cannot seek to understand fluid social identities in such a stable, static symbol. And that is what I was trying to say. But otherwise, the rest of these, I appreciate them as critical insights that should shape this study in terms of theory, in terms of practice of activism, and in terms of going forward in the future of critical masculinities as a field of study.
Thank you, Amon. I think now we can go to Dr. Bila.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Please ask a question. Is there a way in which I can highlight the key issues of feminism that can help us appreciate the autobiography? And I want to link that to Dr. Nsima's question. What is it in this autobiography for us? As history, as a text, this autobiography gives us information about the origin of the School of Women and Gender Studies, how it all started, who were the stakeholders that were involved, and what were the struggles that were there. And this helps us to put in context how an idea that comes up by a group of women can either be challenged or supported. And the enormous support that management at that time, which was predominantly male, gave to this initiative was great. So the School of Women and Gender Studies was started by a group of women, but the support from management, which was predominantly male, was there, and that cannot be discounted. But beyond that, the history of the women's movement and the history of the Department of Social Work and Social Administration and institutional politics generally is represented in this text. And I think linking what she talks about with archival information would help us understand more how women fare within those institutions and how gendered they are, and at a personal level, the struggle of female academicians in climbing the ladder from becoming an ordinary lecturer to becoming a professor. All this, you may think it's just self-narrative, but it has to be understood within the context of the institution. And this particular example is good for us as feminist scholars to understand and appreciate. The second question was from Professor Susan Chiguli. How do I engage with the issue of self-identity and history? That's a very loaded question, and it brings in the question of subjectivity. And actually, one of the scholars, Olney, says that autobiography is a stepchild of history and literature at the same time. Because of that element of subjectivity, the self is there. So how do you engage the self and bring out the question of objectivity? And also you must ask yourself, must the self disclose objectively all the time? Can we also appreciate subjectivity? And I think here we have to then relate to the context, the history, to assess how subjective the self is in representing historical trends, in representing facts that are represented. So new historicism is a theory that I'll be using, but I'll also be questioning at the same time, because there are other theories, standpoint theory, feminist standpoint theory, which talks about the importance of looking at women's subjective positions in their placement in history. It's a continuing conversation that I'll be engaging in. Then Dr. Jibola, thank you for your question.
Last one, Dr.
Was
Bila.
the feeling of isolation, that's the last one?
Yes.
Ankra's presentation, or was it my analysis? The feeling of isolation by Black African Americans who come to the continent was a representation that she made. And she observed when she went to Ghana, actually, the country of her husband's origin, she felt this isolation. When she went to Kenya, she's felt the same. But she decided that she's not going to let herself be loaded by this baggage of feeling always like the other. And she decided to make Uganda her home. That's the title of the book, A Life Without Baggage. So those baggages of isolation, of feeling excluded, of feeling like the other, and she claims crossing the Middle Passage, going back to the history of the former slaves who crossed the Middle Passage through all the difficulties. She has overcome that baggage, and she now feels like she belongs. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Evelyn Utwama.
Thank you, Dr. Saba. I'll begin with Dr. Askuru, who talked about physical strength versus strength of character. I just want to draw your attention to one of the songs that I could not present due to time constraints. The song is called Charenga. Within this song, there's some sort of imagery that the musician puts across that, well, you may look at me as a very small-bodied person and think that I am incapable. Don't think that all those who are heavy lifters and who abanyiga obunyama who make their, there's a way they make their chest dance. So he was kind of comparing his small body to this big body, and he was showing the listener, or he was making the listener aware that, well, size doesn't matter, physique doesn't matter. What matters is within me. I think somehow he's drawing attention to the idea of the strength in character. And so I also agree that really masculinities in Africa have a strong attachment to what they are seen as capable of doing intellectually, in terms of decision making, etc. So that goes to Dr. Askurum. Dr. Musmenta talked about perceptions of perpetuations of gender inequalities. The subject alone that I was dealing with, which is politics, houses so many instances where there are gender inequalities.
In politics and music.
Yeah, politics and music. So I already discussed some of them, whereby it's very hard for the woman to participate as easily as a man does within my presentation. But I also want to draw your attention to one of the parts of the songs that I was going to talk about, only I was stopped, where in Freedom, Bobby Wine sings, Tusituke baboyi, tuchimanyi nti okununula eggwanga kitukakatako. Loosely translated as, let's get up boys. We already know that it's our duty to redeem our nation. So, looking at the redeemers of a nation as boys, first of all, draws your attention to the age that he is referring to, but also the gender. Why exclude the girls or the women in this attempt? So there were many other instances which I could identify, but maybe that will show up in the paper. Then Dr. Chiguli, concerning the truth of looking at popular music as a Western invasion, that was more in line with the early introductions of popular music as a subject on the African continent. I read this in Englert, Birgit, the book called Popular Music and Politics in Africa, but of course, it's subject to further study. Concerning your interest in why I had to go to the field between the months of September 2020 and October 2020, it was very timely. That was before the elections. The young people were highly charged. Those who wanted to contest were strongly believed in themselves. Those who were supporting also had their own energies. And so at that time, that was the right moment for me to ask these questions. In fact, there was a lot of hardship in the field that if I went after the elections, I don't think I would have gathered any information. So I guess I answer you on that. And then finally, to what extent do you distance the presidential candidate from influencing young people's participation? I wanted to say it, but I didn't have time. That the two artists that I identify, first of all, became very popular through their music. That when they decided to stand for positions of responsibility, people easily identified with them because of their music. Bobby Wine, for instance, went so far as vying to be a president. Bosmic Otim wanted to be a member of parliament. And so for both, of course, the journeys are very different. Bosmic Otim, along the way, turned into another, well, he was first of all opposition, and then later on turned into a member of the ruling party. And then Bobby Wine, a different story, he continued to be an opposition member. So I think that there's a relationship between their music, the messages that the music was putting across, and the popularity that they gathered in the process of wanting to be candidates. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama. Lastly, Ruth. 1 minute.
Dr. Agaba and Professor Mangenu, who are very interested in hearing the voices in these conversations about men. I must say from the onset that I deliberately chose to focus on women entrepreneurs, and I don't want to be apologetic about that. We've heard a lot about men entrepreneurs. We see them every day, and we see them prospering, but we still also see women entrepreneurs who are struggling, and they continue to struggle. So I wanted to understand them. Why don't they grow? Why don't their enterprises grow? That was at the back of my mind as a researcher. Yes, I understand we have men and women entrepreneurs, and the prohibitors, the factors that prohibit or enable them to grow, possibly are not very far-fetched from each other. But then the magnitude of the pressure that the women entrepreneurs endure is somehow different from what the men go through and what explains their eventual success. While I was collecting this data, I was very conscious not to digress and look into the men's direction. Of course, I was seeing them. Of course, I had questions that I could ask them, but I wanted to be strategic and ask only the women. And I see justice was missing the chi-squares, but in these conversations I was qualitative, and therefore I cannot brag that it was representative, but I tried as much as possible to have the different types of enterprises that women were engaged in. I also tried as much as possible to have the different social dynamics of the women represented, and that is what I have for you. Dr. Musimenta asked me whether there is a remote control, and I want to say yes. There seems to be a remote control somehow, but there are a number of factors that have enabled women entrepreneurs ride above the remote control of culture, the remote control of the gender roles, the remote control of the limited finances, the remote control of time. Women are time challenged because of the gender roles, but there are women who have found strategies to overcome that.
And lastly, the capability? The
capability, I will take that further from Susan. I will consider that further. I don't have much time for that. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for all your ideas and views. I wish to request you to once again clap for our scholars for the very excellent presentations they have made. All your views and your ideas are going to be used, of course, to improve their work and CHUSS on the move. I thank you very much for enabling me or giving me the opportunity to chair this session. I wish to apologize that we have overshot the time, but I think it was necessary given the circumstances. So I thank you very much. I wish you fruitful deliberations as we continue with the CHUSS conversations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saba. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Saba and Ale careers. As we can see, the conversation has really kicked off very well. We couldn't even stop it. If possible, we would converse about this for the entire day. Thank you so very much. It's tea time now. We request, as you go down, ladies and gentlemen, we give them another round of applause as they go down. Thank you so much. I'll request Lillian to take our dear guest of honor, our principal and our deputy principal for tea. Tea is ready. We have only 15 minutes. If we can use 10, the better, because what is coming after tea is equally hot. We have Dr. Spire in the house. We have Dr. Eve Nabulia, Dr. Kawalia, Dr. Walulia. I tell you, CHUSS is on the move indeed. Zaidi, take the next panelist to have tea. There is tea for everybody. I wish we could have a working tea. Unfortunately, we are not allowed to have tea in the conference hall. The next presenters, please also go for tea. Then when we pick our tea, there is a, would I call it a dining hall? There's a hall there. That's where you sit to have tea. Don't get so comfortable. We have only 10 minutes. Thank you so very much. Enjoy your tea and see you afterwards.